let's go over the things we're making, right? Tool making section. This is a chuck. Basically, it's an open-ended cylinder that you make that flares out at the top. That way, if you make something that's got like a neck and then a big shoulder to it, it can sit upside down in this without you ruining the neck or the lip of the pot, right? These are the sort of weird tools that I talked about. This one I call a rounder. Basically, if you ever dry something too quickly or you like nick it as you're putting plastic on it or something and your lip gets out of round, you can push this inside and re-round out your lip, right? It rounds out the lip, hence I call it a rounder. This little thing I call a beveler. This is really great for if you throw something thin enough to where it doesn't need to be trimmed, but you need the bottom to arch a little bit. That way it only sits on the outside edge. What I basically do with a lot of my work is sort of just like tamp it down on this, and it'll give it like a really nice curve to the bottom without you having to trim that in, right? We use this a lot in slip casting because you don't want a full flat surface, because a whole flat surface is very difficult to get really flat, but just an outside edge is pretty easy to get really flat, right? So we're going to be making these three things. Where's my clay? All right. So we've got 3 pounds of our reclaimed clay. Let's hope it's good to me. We'll see. Will someone pass me that pink cup with tools on it? Thank you very much. My tools. I have like basically 5 different versions of this. Realistically, out of here, the tool I actually use the most is like a wooden rib, and then that's it. I have a lot of like superfluous tools just in case I need them, but you never know. So I've got my bat dampened. I'm gonna roll this around on the bat head just so I can get sort of a point, almost like a top. That way when I smash it down, it's not trapping air, it's forcing air out as it goes down, right? And then I always kind of slap center a little bit. This also does the same thing as when you like hit it twice on the top just to make sure it's really sort of secured on there. But it's a little bit closer than it was, right? So when centering, I usually start by doing this thing I call spider hands. That's when I sort of make my hand look like a spider like this, and I lean on the clay with a lot of pressure. Point being, I just wanted to get a little bit closer than it was before, right? So right here, now we'll switch over to some traditional centering methods where I will do my coning up, coning down, aka wheel wedging. Squeezing my hands together, following the clay up. And then I need to squish back down. I do that by pushing down and to the right, and then...
Why do you do that?
Why do I do that?
Why do people do that, down and to the right?
I'll show you.
Okay.
So oftentimes, if I'm doing it this way, and I try to just come straight down, it like has a tendency to like mushroom like this on me, right? And I find when I do the down and to the right thing, it doesn't do that. I don't know if it's because it's like folding over on itself or what. It also is just a good opportunity for the clay to tell me when it's ready for me to switch hands, right? So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to aim at this camera first. If I push down and to the right, it's folding over, and then it lines itself up under my thumb. That's how I know when to switch directions, right? I'll do it towards this camera so you guys can see. Like if you guys watch, it's folding over. Oh, you can't really see from there. We'll do it this way. And I got some bubbles in here. Again, reclaimed clay. You're gonna have fun with it. So I'm here, I'm folding over, and I'm pushing down. As I'm pushing down, you can see it sort of lean its way back, right? That's when I know it's time to switch hands. And then that motion there is one that you guys sort of need to get down if you're gonna throw bigger, right? Let me squeeze it back up again. So what happens from here to here, kind of doesn't matter that much. You're kind of just centering the top, right? This motion here, like pay attention to what I do with my body, because you need to generate a lot of force to sort of show the clay who's boss. I usually like set my hand flat on the splash pan. I lift my shoulder up. That way I can sort of use my body weight to push in, right? So I push in on the top, and I end by sort of rounding out downward, right? From here.
Is it easier to do it standing up than...
No.
Oh.
Most anything throwing is much easier to do when you're sitting down. Because if you need to, you can stand up and use all your body weight. I can only use like the top, like half of my body weight. But that last little like whoop and back is really important to getting a piece super centered, right? So that's done. We're gonna open up now. I always trace in towards the center so I can find the exact middle. And then I usually do like a finger gun thing to go down here. This works up until about like 4 pounds, and then this isn't quite powerful enough. So I'll get that started. I'll then go down with just like my whole hand kind of in a, like, I don't know, it almost looks like a kung fu shape, you know what I mean? It's like a little V. And we're just gonna go all the way to the bottom, but I do want to leave like a smidge of clay on the very bottom. Imagine you're gonna want to make a cylinder where the bottom is just like crazy thin, right? Because even that crazy thin bottom will yield you structure for a little bit while you're throwing. So I don't mind having a little bit of it down there. Now to open, I keep my like chair hand over here wedged into my body. My other hand wraps around, and then I pull out towards myself. The reason I have this here is because if this wasn't here, it's really likely that in the pulling, the whole thing kind of gets wobbly. So like honestly, that seems like a big enough chuck for me. So I've got basically like a big donut. I'm going to force that inward a little bit. Reason being, if I'm wanting to make a cylinder, I have to try to make a cone, right? If I want to make a bowl, I basically have to try to make a cylinder, just because centrifugal force mixed with the fact that your head's a little bit off to the side and there's a bunch of little factors there, they'll make every cylinder into a bowl shape. You know what I mean? Especially if you're going this fast.
Really, did that happen?
Huh?
That every cylinder turns into a bowl?
Well, yeah,
Did that really happen?
Yeah, it's crazy. So I'm going to slow down my wheel a little bit. So this whole process up to this point, I go max speed. That way the wheel is doing a lot of the work for me. So one thing I notice a lot of students do before they like sort of develop their confidence is they work a little bit slower, I think, than they need to, and sometimes that can work against you, especially in trimming. People who trim really slow, you're giving yourself a lot of opportunity for your stupid human hands to do stupid human stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Let the robot spin fast enough to where it's like limits the amount of humanness you can put into it. So, for my like muscle pulls, I usually use a sponge wrapped around my fingers. I'm gonna squeeze these together. I don't mind that my bat's sort of getting wobbly. Again, this is a tool. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want it to stay on center as close as I can. Anytime I add more water, I usually make like a little scissor hands here, drip water on my knuckles, and then I'll get water going down the inside and the outside, right? Same thing here. Squeeze those two hands in. This is not a great bat. You can tell because it got a little jiggly on me. Another reason I like the scissor thing is the webbing of my finger can round out my lip here and compress it. You see a lot of people when they throw like do a pull and then do this thing. If I do this, I don't ever have to do this thing. Kind of feel where we're at. And I'm going to try to start pulling inward a little bit and then outward. So I call those like shaping pulls. That's where the angle that I'm doing stuff sort of determines what the shape's going to be. That's super important in production throwing because if you're trying to make a bowl that goes out like this and then, or like this and then up, you pull like that in that direction. So because all those are sort of this like, what's the shape? Like cooling tower sort of shape? You know what I mean? I don't know, what would you call it?
Nuclear plant.
Yeah, I usually say like nuclear power plant deal, right? So same thing down here. When I pull, I'm pushing in really hard, and now I'm pulling out. And that way I can get height and shape at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, do you ever make a chuck where instead of being at the same at the top and the bottom, at the top's
A little different?
smaller?
Yeah, you can do that, absolutely.
For smaller things?
Oh, and you start in depending on size.
Did you flip it?
Yeah.
I guess it was. I mean, I assume that.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. I mean, even this is like different on top than it is
Yeah.
on the bottom. So this seems like plenty to me. I'm just going to reset everything. These guys can be kept kind of thick. They also don't have to be thrown super clean. But if you want to, you can, right? These bowl ribs. Clean this up just a little bit. This one doesn't look quite so funky. It does have a little bit of a wobble to it. I'm going to try to get rid of that. I'm going to add some moisture to the outside just by collaring. And when I collar, I can set up a new center point that won't wobble. That make sense, everybody? We got our chuck. Only thing I'm going to need to do now is I want to leave the lip pretty thick up here. And then once it dries out a bit, I'll turn it over and trim it, and I want to leave that lip kind of thick too. That way it doesn't have any sharp corners when I put something heavy onto it. Last thing I'll do is give it a little bit of an undercut. I'm going to let this firm up a bit before I wire under it. One thing that happens when you have an open cylinder, when you wire it, it tends to distort quite a bit. So I'm going to wait until it's like kind of a leather hard before I go under it, hopefully so that it doesn't distort. That make sense?
When did you clear out the center?
How thin is the floor?
The floor is maybe like a millimeter or two. Yeah, it's still there. Yeah, but when I cut it, you ever notice when you cut like a plate or something, the wire rides up in the middle and cut like gets rid of a bunch of your clay? That's sort of going to do this process for us and get rid of the whole bottom. But I did leave it like teeny thin just for structure's sake, right? And again, that way when I wire it, it's not like taco shaped. But this concept of like kind of open cylinder, you use for a lot of stuff, so pay attention to that, right? So that's like the most difficult of the three tools for the most part. The next one would be the rounder. This one's open on the bottom. I don't love that, again, because things that are open on the bottom, when you fire them, have a tendency to warp, which I don't love, so...
Tyler, when you were finding the center, I've never heard that before.
It's okay, what's up?
So what did you say to find the center before you went down?
I'll do it on this next one.
Ah,
Let's round this out. When you do the slap center, you don't really want wet hands because you're gonna, as you can see, like shoot clay up at yourself. So I'm gonna spin it here. I'm gonna spider hands, kind of lean into it.
Which one are you making?
I'm gonna make the rounder, so the kind of conical one.
Well, I could have used that tool the last year and a half.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
With my elbows so active.
So, I mean, because this is a smaller piece of clay, I'm not going to do the full shebang, like cone all the way up, fold it. You don't have to do all that, right? So, with a smaller piece of clay, you can sort of do a diet version of the cone up, cone down. And I do that by going left hand pressure, and it'll rise up a little bit. Right hand pressure, and it'll squeeze down. Left hand pressure, right hand pressure. And I'll do that a few times to sort of line it up. Again, because it's reclaimed, it's got little bits of stuff in it. It's got bubbles. Gabe pulled a rubber band out of one of his bowls the other day, which is really funny.
How many pounds is this?
This is maybe like 2 pounds.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing crazy. Yeah, the rounders don't have to be gigantic, right? So I just want to get it.
Your chuck was 3 pounds, right?
Chuck was 3 pounds, yeah. I just want to get it on center, right? And I'm going to use my little karate chop to flatten that out a bit. And JT, what I was talking about is to find the very center of this. A lot of times, what I see folks do is just kind of like guess where the middle is and push their thumbs down. I find oftentimes you end up with a thick side and a thin side when you do that. That turns into a tall side and a short side. So what I teach people to do, make like a finger gun, trace in from the middle. Can you see that there's like a little mountain that's appearing? If you keep pushing, that mountain will give way to a divot. Right where that divot is the center, right? And I usually exaggerate that a little bit, so it's easier for me to find. So now I'm going to use my finger gun and push down. That's sort of at 45. One of the reasons I do that is because I come from a production throwing background, and the clay I used was garbagey clay like this, and so there was a lot of bubbles and rocks and stuff like that in it. Pushing down like this has a tendency to pop a lot of bubbles as you're going. So we're down here. I am going to, well, this is interesting. It's like a totally different color clay down here. Might be mold. That's not bad. Yeah, it'll burn out. Mold oftentimes means that your clay has like homogenized well, and there's like a good bacterial growth and fungal growth going on in there, which means your clay won't be really short. Short meaning like instead of stretching, it'll break. Mold's usually a good thing in pottery. Weird, huh? I know, bizarre. Or maybe it's a rubber band, I don't know, you can't really tell. So, I've got this opened up. The one that we passed around is open on the bottom. We're not gonna do that. We're basically gonna throw a cylinder that has a base, and then we're gonna enclose that cylinder, right? So if we're making cylinders, again, max speed, chair hand on the outside, finger goes around like this, pull out towards himself. And I'm gonna pull this out pretty wide. One thing to be mindful of, if your bat pins don't have the wing nuts on the bottom, they'll rise up like this and clip your hand. Not super fun. So try to keep your eyes on that.
How come those butterfly nuts have been taken off?
You don't necessarily need them. You know what I mean? Like I throw on this wheel all the time, and I almost never use them. Hey, what's this? Piece of plastic.
Yeah, but then when you go to take your bat off and one of those things comes up, you got to get it out and screw up the top.
Yeah. So you don't always. If you're good at it, you don't, right? That wasn't a dig. That just like comes with practice, right? One of the reasons is the not butterfly. What are the wing nuts? They fuse to the bolts, and then you have to saw them off with like a rotary saw. And I've had to do that to a bunch of the wheels, and it ruins the wheel head a lot of the times. So I try not to have those. Or what I started doing now is buying nylon wing nuts and stuff like that, which we have a bunch more coming soon. So if there's not enough right now, they'll be here in a couple days. So I'm making a cylinder, so I need to push in so that I end up with a cone. And I do want the base to be kind of wide. Reason being, with something like this, I can widen something that's got a lip that's this big or all the way up to this big, right? So I want a wide base there. I am going to compress the middle. Again, even though it's a tool, it's not as important, but we want to practice how we play, right? So we're there. I'm then going to slow my wheel down. And you guys notice that I do a lot of like set it and forget it cruise control on my wheel. I do that because folks have a tendency to max speed when they're using a lot of pressure and they're nervous, and then like they'll go really slow when they're really unsure. So what I find is I'll do it at like a sort of medium speed and then let it go. That way my like stupid human foot doesn't throw me off, you know what I mean? So we're here, we're gonna start doing pulls, squeeze in at the base, and when I rise up, I'm really trying to rise up in towards the middle. You can see my bat moving around to JT's point about having the wing nuts on there, right? Push those back down. So we're here, and we're gonna continue to do the work. It doesn't have to be mega tall. Having it tall is not a bad thing necessarily, but when you're pulling, you really want to try to hyper focus on pulling inward. Just because most of us, sorry, I hit a thin spot in my clay. That's one of my favorite things when it happens, because knowing how to fix those things is like, I kind of equate it to like a musician who never screws up. Isn't as impressive to me as a musician that screws up and then fixes it before you can notice that they screwed up, right?
Did you just push it back down a little bit?
So what I did is I put a hand on the outside, hand on the inside. All it did was like I hit a thin spot and it folded real quick, which isn't the end of the world. So I'm just kind of doing like compression from all sides to get it back where it needs to be.
Did you push down on it a little bit?
Not really. It was mainly like inward. So I'm gonna go in here and mop my water out because we're making an enclosed form, and water will make this doohickey crack. So now that we're here, we can sort of squeeze in and together towards the top, collaring it in. Every couple collars you need to do a pull, just because you've really thickened the clay from there up. So now we'll do a couple more collars. I'm doing this just by making sort of like an O with my hand and choking it up, right? I'm going to do this. I guess technically it doesn't have to enclose on the top, which it might honestly be kind of cool to not have it enclosed. That way if you have like a really skinny bottleneck base, you could potentially do something with it. But usually they do sort of enclose up top like that. For ease of repetition, we're just going to do that. I keep closing and closing and closing. Usually I do it to where I have like this kind of weird, ugly candlestick shape, you know what I mean? And I do that until that pops off. Right, now I've got this enclosed. I don't have to have inside pressure with my hands because there's a bunch of air inside there pushing out, right? So I can do a lot of shaping right now. And so there's a couple ways you can do this. You can do it sort of swooping in this way. What I often do is just have kind of a straight thing down to the end. Really good verbiage there. Sort of a straighter shape. It doesn't have to be convex. scraping off some of the stuff in the bottom. And this I do want to be nice and clean because I'm going to put my lip of my pot on there. So just check out the shape. Like, think of the shapes that you make usually, right? Like, how wide are your mugs? How wide are like a bigger mug that goes deeper? You know what I mean? And then adjust this to sort of match that. Scrape all this excess off. Give myself a little bit of an undercut. And I'm not going to trim this or anything because it doesn't really matter, but I am going to wire under it now, just so it's a little bit easier for me. Anybody have any questions so far?
Would you glaze that to?
Nope. I'm going to leave this as bisque because a lot of these things you want to be porous a little bit. If you do it with glaze, it's likely going to stick to the leather hard pot, but something that's bisque won't. So I only bisque fire these. All three of these tools. So.
That's what, about a pound? Or?
I would say probably less than a pound. Pretty close though. And this one we're just going to throw solid. That's why you don't need very much clay, right? Theoretically, you could do this shape hollow, but it just seems like a lot of work for not that much benefit. So instead, I'm just going to get this thing nice and centered, doing the left hand pressure, right hand pressure, karate chop method. Left hand pressure rises up, right hand pressure swishes down. And then all you're really trying to do is center this sort of flat and wide. Same concept as like the rounder. That way if I have something that's kind of narrow, I can use it. And if I have something that's kind of wide, I can use it. This is a little wide for me. Right around there feels pretty good. And then when I'm trying to make that dome shape, I'm sort of karate chopping from an angle. I don't know if you guys can see, but I've got sort of this divot in the middle, which I don't love. So I'm going to go back to left hand, right hand pressure. Start that over. Like so. Get it down on the edge. And then we've got our roughed out shape. Give it a corner. Clean off the schmug. I don't like to let it be thicker than maybe like an inch. I find after that the clay will have a hard time shrinking at the right stage and you'll get cracks. If you get a crack on the bottom of this, doesn't really matter because you're not using the bottom of this. But I try to, again, practice how I play. And this is really good for, like if you're putting work, especially in like an atmospheric kiln, like a salt kiln, having a really beautiful, tiny trimmed foot makes it very difficult to put wads on. And so it actually like works against you. So if I throw something thin enough, or even when I trim it, I don't oftentimes trim the base and give it a foot well. I'll just trim the outside to get rid of weight. And then I'll just sort of bevel the bottom. That way I can put wads on it and it'll work a little bit easier. Some forms don't necessarily need to be trimmed. And some firing methods, it makes it more difficult. That's that. That's the beveler. Anybody got any questions? You feeling pretty good? Cool. I recommend everybody like make one of these. You don't have to make all three if you don't think you're going to use them. But at least make one, and then just like do whatever you want. Start working on forms so that we got stuff to practice with. Okay? All right. So here's a prime example, right? I did both things on this, right? I've got a cylinder shape. When I'm putting plastic on, or at any point I sort of nick this and it gets into a weird shape. When it's leather hard, I'll put it on here and spin it. Because this is round, it will round out the lip, right? Now the base of this, which I did trim, but I just trimmed the outside and the corner. I didn't trim the inside because I'm going to soda fire this. The way that the rounder works is I'll set this on a table. Once this is leather hard or after I've trimmed it, I'll basically just do this and I'll sort of press down on it. That will give it an arch in the base. That way the outside edge is the only edge that touches the surface of the table.
But then you've got
Which is good.
on the inside. So if you have a bowl, you don't want.
You don't do that on bowls. No, bowls you almost always trim. I find just because when you throw a bowl, you need to have so much structure there to throw a good bowl that you have to trim a lot of clay away anyways. I usually use this on cylindrical forms or bases. Does that make sense? Go. Yeah, please do. Everybody understand? Everybody feeling good? Excellent. Go have fun.